Because our guest is already here and will be here in 5 minutes, so just want everybody to settle down and as a courtesy, switch off your cell phones. That will be a good thing to do. I don't have anything to display over here. So, Professor, then our guest will be here in 5 minutes. I have to call them and just ask them to come over here. Get settled and we'll start at 5. Thank you.
Good evening, guys. EPGP class of 2012. Welcome to you all to the seminar series today. EPGP, as you all might have known, that it is the one-year full-time MBA program at IIM, and as part of the program, we have what we call the seminar series, where we invite eminent personalities from different walks of life, such as social sciences, management, politics, etc. We also invite eminent doctors, scientists, writers, politicians, journalists. The idea, the aim is to learn from their varied experiences, varied life experiences, and get a well-rounded view of life that we can take away from, right? So, and it is actually as part of this series that it is my honor to welcome Ramachandra Guha to the podium today. Brief introduction on Dr. Guha, who, by the way, does not need any introduction, but still let me try. He is an eminent writer and a historian. He studied at St. Stephen's in Delhi School of Economics, and he got his FPM from our own IIM, although Calcutta. But yeah, his literary interests are also very diverse. He has written books, articles, and columns on various subjects such as environment, anthropology, politics, and of course cricket. I'm sure you all know that, right? So, so without any ado, I'm going to welcome you once again to the podium. Thank you. We also have many of our esteemed professors in attendance today. Welcome to you all too. Dr. L. Prasad, who is the chairperson of EPGP, Dr. Ramachandra Guha, and other professors. I haven't taken classes from you also, sorry. Alright, so I sense the eagerness and the enthusiasm of the crowd, so let me start out with the trivia, right? So do you all know which is the first book that Dr. Guha wrote? Let me see some hands raised. Srinivas.
The Unquiet Woods.
That's correct. Alright. Which year did Dr. Guha receive the Padma Bhushan Award?
2009.
Absolutely. Very right. So talking about awards, I'm going to read out a couple other awards. By no means is this an exhaustive list, just to give you an idea of the places where he has been recognized. The Foreign Policy magazine from the US named him as one of the top 100 public intellectuals in the world in May of 2008. And as we mentioned already, he has received the third highest civilian award from the Government of India, which is Padma Bhushan in 2009. Okay, without wasting any more time, I just want to give you some ground rules for today's interaction in the essence of time, and also having known that Dr. Guha is an authority on various issues. We are trying to limit our interaction today to perhaps most famous of his two books. One of them is India After Gandhi, and the next one is The Makers of Modern India. So then that to Dr. Guha, and he'll answer the questions, and if we have time left over at the end, maybe we can open it for other questions. So good? Alright, so while I'm waiting for you guys to give me the questions, we already have some pre-prepared questions. We're going to start with that.
What you sit, stand?
Whatever is comfortable. Right-wing extremists. Why did Gandhi's pacifist ideology find favor with the majority? Does it have to do with the philosophical disposition of the peace-loving and God-fearing people, or was it the charisma of Gandhi?
I don't know. It's a myth that Indians are peace-loving. It's a myth that Indians are non-violent. And it's a particular myth that Hindus are peace-loving and non-violent. The way we treated our women and low castes down the centuries doesn't speak of tolerance or violence or pacifism. So I think Gandhi's charisma had a great deal to do with it. And I think when you think of Gandhi's charisma and Gandhi's methods, non-violence is only one component. I think, and I prefer the word non-violence to pacifism. Because pacifism is sort of, non-violence is sort of much more direct, and it emphasizes the choice that we will not be violent, to be non-violent. And I think Gandhi, there are several aspects to Gandhi's non-violence. One was, it was a matter of principle that to kill a man or a woman voluntarily implies that you are 100% correct and he is 100% wrong. It leaves no shadow of doubt. This is virtually never the case. But I think non-violence also had a pragmatic element, and this leads me to what is very much more interesting about Gandhi than non-violence, and what is linked to the question that why did Gandhi succeed when other people didn't, is Gandhi's pluralism. I think Gandhi's extraordinary genius was to recognize that any successful freedom movement in India had to be based on an inclusive social and political policy. It could not, it could not privilege a certain religion, a certain language, a certain gender, a certain caste. Because India was divided along all these axes. And so non-violence and pluralism go hand in hand. No, you start reciprocity and dialogue between different parts of Indian society. Hindus and Muslims, North Indians and South Indians, men and women, upper caste and low caste. You find a common agenda, and then you articulate the agenda to the foreign rulers non-violently. Once you introduce violence, a armed struggle against the British, there's a danger which Gandhi always recognized of that you will unleash it on your own people. So if you pick up a gun and shoot Angrez, what's to stop you from picking up a gun and shooting somebody else because he's from a different religion or has a different language or whatever? I think Gandhi's pluralism is much more important in some ways than non-violence. They go together, and that's really his genius. I think that's why we are one nation. That's why we are not a Hindu Pakistan. That's why, unlike Sri Lanka, we have not balkanized on the basis of language. It's the pluralism. I think non-violence and pluralism go hand in hand.
Thank you very much. Next question. Did India pay a high price due to the non-aligned stand that it took in its formative years? Could allegiance with the big brother have prevented the Chinese misadventure?
Allegiance with big brother. Now, it's like this. That this is a very long essay which will come in Economic and Political Weekly in a couple of months on the China war. So I'll come to the China war. But non-violence, non-alignment. I think non-alignment is both necessary and judicious. It allowed us, to play both sides in the Cold War. You get a steel mill built by the Russians and a steel mill built by the Americans. How many here are from any of the IITs? All right. There's an IIT promoted by the Americans, the IIT promoted by the Russians, the IIT promoted by the Germans. So I think it allowed us to play both sides. It was also absolutely crucial that at its time that we didn't, we maintained the independent moral standard. I think later on there were elements of hypocrisy. I think when we established ourselves as a nation successfully, perhaps we didn't have to be so beholden to the Soviet Union. A good example of this is, little known example, is the 1980. So the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in November, December 1979. And Indira Gandhi by then, let me give a little bit of background. Even non-alignment was necessary till the mid-70s. In 1971, when we had the refugee crisis with Bangladesh, 9 million people came over from East Pakistan. And Nixon and Kissinger were taking the side totally of the brutal Pakistani generals, and they didn't care about our refugee crisis. I think they didn't have to go to the Soviets. But in '79, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, I think that's where non-alignment hit a start. The invasion took place in November, December. The Prime Minister was Charan Singh, who was Prime Minister for about 2.5 months. He was interim Prime Minister. Charan Singh had grown up politically in the 40s and 50s. He knew what non-alignment meant. It meant we are opposed to imperialist misadventure, whether by the Americans in Vietnam or by the Soviets in Czechoslovakia. And Charan Singh issued a statement saying we are opposed to the Soviets invading Afghanistan. Indira Gandhi came to power in January 1980 and blindly supported the Soviets. And that had cost for our moral standing, it had cost for the Afghan people too. Because I think even today they will tell you that why did you support the Soviets? 40s and 50s and 60s, when we were a young, independent nation, searching for a role in the world, non-alignment was both morally necessary and politically shrewd. The China war is a long and complicated story, so I won't go into it now, except to say that in a sense the war was inevitable. I'll just give a brief background of the China war. Next year is the 50th anniversary. Here were two large, great ancient civilizations coming out of a history of colonization, finding themselves anew in a modern world as nations, as economic powers, and they were meeting at the borders. So friction was inevitable. If you think of two suppressed individuals, finding themselves and then fighting over something, shall we say cricket bats, correct? And this is much more serious than cricket bats. This is thousands and thousands of square miles of territory. Some friction was necessary, and it's a long and complicated story as to why we couldn't sign an agreement. But essentially, there's a western border and an eastern border. The eastern border is Arunachal Pradesh. The western border is essentially Ladakh and parts of Himachal Pradesh. China's needs were on the west. They wanted a road linking Xinjiang to Tibet after the Tibetan problem. But our claims were stronger in the west. Historically, if you look at the maps, our claims are much stronger in the west. The parts of Ladakh that the Chinese have built the road are actually essentially historically belong to India. But our claims are actually quite weak in the east. Our claims in Arunachal Pradesh are not foolproof. And what happened was China wanted territory in the west where our claims were strong. Where their claims are strong in the east, they didn't care. So Shah and I told Nehru, let's strike a deal, a private deal. Give us a little bit in the west and we'll give you the whole of Arunachal Pradesh. Now this kind of deal is possible in a dictatorship. But in a democracy, Nehru had to take it to parliament. He had to discuss it. And Parliament said not an inch of not an inch of land will be said, not an inch of Bharat Mata will be ceded to anyone. But it's a complex story. And if you look at, as in any complex dispute, between husband and wife, between shareholders in a company, whatever, the dispute between India and China, is a very complicated one in which it's not easy to attribute right and wrong. And one of the things, I'll just make one point about this. When I wrote India after Gandhi, I wrote it as a historian, not as an Indian. Which meant, when I wrote about our disputes with China and Pakistan, I tried to observe non-partisanship. Look at, as a historian would. And this is to do with Kashmir too. With Kashmir, one interview, in an Indian newspaper sent after I wrote my book, Guha says, India's case on Kashmir is not foolproof. This interview was reproduced in a Pakistani newspaper under the headline, Indian historian says Kashmir belongs to Pakistan. That's not what I said. I said, Pakistan's case is also not foolproof. But when you think of complex border disputes, as between India and Pakistan, or between India and China, it's very, you have to look at it in a non-linguistic way, if you're a scholar. And when it comes to China, essentially, you've got two great ancient civilizations with an enormous depth of history, of literature, of philosophy, of science, with a massive chip on their shoulder because they've been colonized by the Europeans. They got rid of the Europeans, they were finding their way in a post-World War world, and they clashed at the border. And it's kind of innovative. It's a logic of history which said that they should clash. And actually, by the standards of modern warfare, it was not even a skirmish. So 3,000 people died. Like the Tamil rank in India, so to say. So it should really scar us, and the way it has, but it has.
Thank you. Next question, would India have progressed much faster and more consistently had we had a worthy political opponent to the Congress? Even in contemporary India, does the Congress have a worthy opponent? Going back, was the Muslim League victory in 1946 a shock to Nehru and Gandhi? You have pointed out that the Congress underestimated Jinnah and his league in particular, and the Muslim view of secularism in general. Why do you think this may have happened?
Well, I'll leave the latter part. These are many questions into one, so it's hard to organize it. But the core of it, what would India have been like if the Congress had a worthy political opponent? Does the Congress have a worthy political opponent today? Well, of course, is the Congress a worthy political party today? That's It is, as I say in my book, an unnatural nation and an unnatural democracy. So if you look at the size, the diversity, the complexity, no previous model fits. Ideally, one would want a stable two-party system in the center. This was not possible in the 1950s because of the extraordinary impact the Congress had under Gandhi and his colleagues in melding this nation together. I talked about pluralism, building bridges between North and South, Hindus and Muslims, Hindi speakers and Tamil speakers, and so on and so forth. And the Congress carried over that legacy. It was very hard to do. There was one moment in the late 1950s when you had a truly visionary politician, Chakravarti Rajagopalachari, who coined the phrase license permit quota Raj, who had grown up with the Congress, with Nehru, who then became his political opponent. And it was possible then to think perhaps of a slightly left of center and a slightly right of center option that the Congress and the Swatantra Party would have. That didn't work out. You had another option perhaps later on, the option we are living in through now, where you could think of BJP slightly right of center, Congress slightly left of center. But that's not happening because we are so diverse. And what's likely to happen, historians should be astrologers, and I hope this prediction is not held against me, because it may or may not be right, but it's likely that the BJP and the Congress are both going to decline further, and in 2014, neither is remotely going to get near 200 seats. Because we are a very complex country, regional parties based on language, on region, on caste are important. So I think, but I've been thinking about it a lot, and I haven't reached a clear answer. Of course, it would be ideal if we have a stable two-party system, one slightly left, one slightly right. It would help even more if parties were run on open democratic lines internally. For the more disturbing aspects of our current parliament is how many parliamentarians are the sons or daughters of previous parliamentarians. So I think dynasty is very bad generally in politics. But I think what we should really want in India today and in the India of tomorrow, at least in the foreseeable future, is not a stable two-party system in the center, because we are unlikely to get it. But we need a stable two-party system in each of our states. One of the reasons Canada has such a fantastic human development record, because it has a stable two-party system, which keep a check on each other, the Congress and the Communists. There are many other reasons why Canada has a very good human development record. It's to do with the gender equality promoted by visionaries, by Marxists, by a matriarchal system. It's to do with the great social reformer Narayana Guru and his emancipation of the low caste, and so on and so forth. But there are reasons why Canada has a much better record in education, health. Canada politicians are generally much less corrupt than elsewhere. And A.K. Antony may or may not be an efficient defense minister, but I can assure you he's not taken a single paisa. Which is rare to say in Indian politics. So, but in Canada you have that. Generally the levels of corruption, of efficient administration are higher because of a stable two-party system. Likewise, Himachal Pradesh. Himachal Pradesh has had a fantastic record in human development, and which is totally counterintuitive, because these are Rajputs, they are kind of male chauvinists, it's a caste society, it's feudal, and yet because they've had a stable two-party system, Congress, BJP, and they check on each other, you've had the state progressing. So I think that's what we really need. It's not a two-party system in the center, which we may never get, but we really are a union of 28 countries, in a sense. We're like Europe, so to say. And what we need probably is to work towards an efficient two-party model, where you alternate and each party can keep a check on you.
Next question, in your opinion, how has it fared? Could there have been a better way? On one hand, with our abundance of languages, isn't it a recipe for balkanization? And on the other hand, even states sharing the language are fighting among themselves. What's your view on this?
It can't be one view. It can't be a static view. It has to be a dynamic view. And I would say the division of states on linguistic grounds has saved India. That's why all of us are here today. I'm sure there are people here. If I was to define, how many of you are from North India? How many of you are from East India, which is Bengal, Orissa, and the Northeast? Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand. How many of you from South India? Alright. How many of you from Gujarat, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and Goa? Alright. We are here today for two reasons. For several reasons. One of these is Gandhi, Nehru, and that generation of leaders. A second is the integration of princely states under Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. The third reason is linguistic states. linguistic states help deepen unity of India, and emphatically, at this point, is emphatically proved by the fact that Pakistan was created on the basis of religion, divided on the basis of language, when the West Pakistanis imposed Urdu on the East Pakistanis. Sri Lanka underwent a bloody civil war because the Sinhala speaking majority would not give the Tamil speaking minority adequate protection for their language and their culture. In 1956, when the map of India was being drawn on linguistic lines, when you had the States Reorganization Commission, which created the states of Kerala for the Malayalis and Karnataka for the Kannada speakers and so on, the same year, the Prime Minister of Ceylon imposed a Sinhala-only policy, and there was a left-wing MP in the Sri Lankan Parliament who opposed it, and he said, 2 languages, 1 country, 1 language, 2 bleeding countries. And in India, there will be 1 language, 22 or 24 countries, bleeding countries. And I'll tell you a story about this, which shows, a kind of how we are united because of this. And this is a long complicated answer, so I'll come to the present in a minute. Some years ago, about 10 or 15 years ago, the Prime Minister of the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Mr. Mulayam Singh Yadav, 1993, so almost 20 years ago, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Mulayam Singh Yadav, wrote a letter to the Chief Minister of Kerala, E.K. Nayana. The letter was in Hindi. The answer came back in Malayalam. Now there were many more people, very fewer people in Lucknow who read Malayalam than there were people in Kerala who read Hindi. So Mulayam Singh got the message, drafted a letter in English, to which I replied in English. Now language is the most important aspect of human identity, more important than caste, than religion, than nationality. It's what defines us, the language we speak. And each of our languages has extraordinarily rich literature and heritage. I mean, if you think of the depth of Kannada literature, Telugu literature, Tamil literature, Hindi literature, Bengali literature, Odia literature, the attachment of the people to the language is so important that linguistic states allow us to cultivate that attachment, to have our education, administration with that, and yet be part of a larger country. So, linguistic states have deepened unity of India. What has happened over a period of time is that maybe we need to redraw the map of India again. We are only 64 years old as an independent nation, and we are still finding our way. It's an extraordinary political experiment. We have been thousands of years old as a civilization, but as an independent, united, democratic nation, we are less than 2 generations old, 60 years old. So we are still finding our way, and I think we need a new States Reorganization Commission. This is what was promised by the UPA in the 2004 elections, and they were too nervous and weak to implement. The reason linguistic states worked was that in 1956, you had a States Reorganization Commission which had 3 extraordinary non-partisan people as its members. It had a lawyer, a former judge, it had a historian, and it had a social worker. And you can certainly find in the Republic of India 3 outstanding intellectuals who are non-partisan, who understand the law, who know politics, who know anthropology, who can come up with a new way of dividing our state boundaries. Clearly, some of our states are too large. I think UP is absolutely too large. I think there is a strong case to be made for Telangana. There is a case to be made for Gohaland because the northern hill districts of West Bengal are completely distinct ethnically, culturally, linguistically from the south. There are other cases, but we do it case-by-case basis. And our politicians are too scared and too nervous to do this. So I think there's an argument for going the next step. Linguistic states were necessary to safeguard the unity of India in the first 20 or 30 or 40 years. Now maybe we need, instead of 28 states, we need 40 or 50, and we will give it a place.
Thank you. Next we have a question from Shekhar Menon. Shekhar here. Okay, I'll read his question. Given our lack of attention to the Northeast region and given its history of violent struggles, where do you see the Northeast insurgency problem heading? Recent developments, arrest of Rajkumar Meghan of Manipur, who entered UNLF rebel group, at least one faction, and Arvind Rajkova of ULFA planning to join peaceful movement. Naga rebels split down the middle. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a very complex issue. Again, as a historian, I have to draw your attention to how difficult and intractable these problems are. If you think of if you look at the history of other nations and how they were formed and the struggle it took for them to achieve their present geographical boundaries, for them to be at peace with themselves as democracies, as single entities, they are marked by civil war and fratricide. So India is not unique. It's true of France, it's true of Spain, it's true of the United States. The civil war of the 1860s killed millions and millions of people. We haven't had that kind of experience. So the Northeast is a complicated issue. And, how do you resolve it? I think you need a deeper federalism. A deeper federalism in which the states have much more autonomy. I think there's no reason why we can't, each state, as the American model, can't have two flags legally. I think you have to be less obsessed with national unity and centralization. There has to be give and take on the side of the rebels too. They have to give up arms. They have to recognize that it's much better to be part of a larger Indian family. I mean, if you look at the example of other insurgencies, if you look at the example of India from the 50s, the Tamils in the 50s were committed to independence. It was only in 1963 that the DMK gave up its plan for a separate Tamil Nadu. I mean, most of you are too young, but not the faculty members and not me. I'm not too young to remember what happened in the early 1980s with Afghanistan. A great success to the Northeast has been Mizoram, which had a savage insurgency from the 60s to the 80s, but then as the result of a far-sighted peace deal, the insurgents gave up their guns and entered the democratic process, and Mizoram has been at peace ever since. So I think Kashmir is a highly complex issue. As I said in the beginning, when it comes to Kashmir, India's case is not foolproof and Pakistan's case is not foolproof. Which is why Kashmir needs even more special attention from us, and it doesn't get it. I mean, I'm happy to talk about Kashmir later. If anyone has a Kashmir specific question, because I have strong ideas about what can and what cannot be done about Kashmir. But when it comes to the Northeast, I think ways have to be found of reconciling the sentiments, the aspirations, the desires of the people, of calming their fears and their anxieties in an honorable and decent way. And it requires far-sighted people. I mean, it doesn't require, sometimes the central government is too short-sighted. There's an insurgency, so they send only former generals and former police officers as governors, who have a paranoid, insecure mindset and say, so more guns, more violence, and it escalates. Instead of sending, people with more vision. I forget who it was, it may be VP Singh, I'm not sure who was the Prime Minister, but one of the best governors in Nagaland, who still remember, was a man called M.M. Thomas, who came from Kerala, who was a scholar and a theologian. Nagaland is a fully Christian state. So you sent a man who was incidentally Christian, but who was a scholar and a professor who understood the complexity of religion and language and identity, not someone who was a general who thought all Nagas look different from us and the enemies of the Indian state because they sometimes cover them. So I think it was a great deal of effort for both sides. It also requires efforts for insurgents. I think it's wonderful what's happening in Assam today. Because I think, if you think of these, none of these states are viable as independent nations. It's a completely fantastic dream, farcical dream. But they entertain this dream because they've been slighted, they've been neglected, they've been condescended to by the rest of India and by the government. And it requires a lot of patient hard work. In the Northeast, of course, we have a further problem, which is that of communication and transport, because we only have a narrow access to them. And now, of course, talks are going on with Bangladesh, and may they succeed, of allowing much freer movement through Bangladesh into the Northeast from the rest of India.
I have a related question on the Northeast. This is from Mr. Pramudit Agarwal. Sorry if I said the name wrongly. You talked about the various insurgent groups that were once active in India. What do you think are the main reasons why the Manipur issue was solved amicably, but the Naxal issue persists until today?
Manipur is not solved. Manipur is actually the worst one.
Mizoram was solved amicably, but the Naxal issue persists until today, especially considering the fact that Bengal was considered a more stable state than any of the southern sisters.
So, what is Naxal issue?
Why was the do you want to clarify?
Yeah, go ahead. Just speak out.
So my main question was that what was the reason that the Naxal issue still persists? And why were the northeastern issues were kind of resolved?
So they are not completely resolved, but I'll talk about the Naxal issue because I made a special study. The Naxal issue Again, these are all, there's not no particular reason. I mean, it's a complex of many reasons. But what's happened over the last, the Naxalite movement started in Bengal in the 1960s. There was also a splinter group in Andhra Pradesh. They always worked with the most disadvantaged of Indians, with the Adivasis and the Dalits, partly in Bihar, then later on in Bihar and so on. But they were never very effective politically because they were always fighting among themselves. And this is very common among left-wing intellectuals. They just can't get along. It used to be said of Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, who was a great hero of the Russian Revolution and later broke up with Stalin. It used to be said of the Trotskyists that one Trotskyist is a branch, two Trotskyists are a party, and three Trotskyists are a split. So the Maoists were also very sectarian, and there were some 16 or 18 groups. In 2004 they united, and they merged. Now that really consolidated their influence, and then they started spreading in other parts of India. And they spread particularly, the last 8 or 9 years, they spread particularly in the Adivasi. And they spread for two reasons. One is that it's classic terrain for guerrilla warfare, the hills and the forests. And the other reason is that the Adivasis are the most exploited of all communities in India. More exploited than the Dalits, more exploited than the minorities, more exploited than the women, more exploited than the northeastern people. I've written a piece that will come in Hindustan Times on Independence Day. Which explains several reasons why Adivasis are the most. And they have been they've been dispossessed. They don't have a fair share of political power. Never have any Adivasis as chief ministers, as governors, as high court judges. They are Dalits and Muslims in all of these positions. Their land is taken away by dams, by mines, by forest companies, and so on. They don't have no access to education, health, infrastructure, and so they become amenable to propaganda by the Maoists, and they will liberate, emancipate. So Maoism has spread. It's also spread because of the apathy and corruption of the police, the mistakes made by different state governments, so on. Now it's a real crisis situation, and it's not going to improve in the short term. It's not going to improve in the short term because the Indian state is completely incapable of bringing justice to the others. As it stands today, Rahul Gandhi went a year ago to Niyamgiri in Orissa, where he told the Adivasis there would be displaced by a mine, and he told them, Delhi mein main aapka sipahi hu. In the year since, he's done bugger all over there. And at least he went there for one day. The other politicians have not even been there for one day. So what's going to happen in the short term is that the roots of Adivasi discontent and deprivation, it's hard to imagine the government reforming itself. The public institutions that have stayed near collapse, reforming themselves. The mining companies, Indian and foreign, that are unbelievably greedy for what lies behind, underneath the Adivasi land. So it's going to intensify. On the other side, the Maoists are also a bit crazy. They're obsessed with armed struggle, with total revolution, which will never work. So they escalate the violence, and ways have to be found of debate and dialogue, of properly reforming the state so that Adivasis are treated as equal citizens, and of telling these Maoists that they have to follow their comrades in Nepal and give up the government in their elections. They can fight elections and run good governments that deliver welfare and justice to the Adivasis. But that's not going to happen because the government in the short term is incapable of reform. The Maoists are obsessed by this fantasy and romance of armed struggle. So, and it's invisible to all of us. It's a problem. The Northeast is written about, Kashmir is written about, Khap Panchayats and female suicides are written about, oppression of Dalits is written about, and these are all real problems. I'm not minimizing any of them. Whether it be discrimination against Dalits, against women, the disturbances in the Northeast are real problems. But the real tragedy of independent India, of independent and free and democratic India, is that if things proceed the way they are going now, we will do to our Adivasis what the Europeans did to the Native Americans, what the Australians did to the abolitionists. That's the tragedy that's unfolding right now. And it's invisible. Because you fly from Delhi to Bangalore and back, and it's 35 feet below you on the ground with this civil war being played out. So it's a very complicated issue, and it requires the kind of courage and detailed thinking that is not for coming from the government, but not from the Maoists. I mean, the Maoists are also fanatical, because they're fanatical about this cult of violence, which is not helping anyone.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Srinivas Deshpande.
Portrayed in India after Gandhi, that Nehru was so as Nehru being so secular, liberal and pan-Indian, than Patel or even Rajgopal. So was it really a simple choice for Mahatma Gandhi to choose Nehru as the real leader back then over the other stalwarts? And what is really the influence that how Gandhi really handled Nehru, Rajaji or Patel all at the same time? And even after Gandhi did choose Nehru, there was such, if I say, the camaraderie between Patel and Nehru on nation building activities, etc. Is that, of course that is missing currently in terms of patriotism, maturity and dialogue and debate. What's your take on this?
You raised a series of important questions, partly historical, partly contemporary. On the historical, to underline Gandhi's choice. Gandhi's chose Nehru because he felt Nehru was a North Indian who appealed to South Indian, a Hindu who was trusted by Muslim, a man who was admired by women, and in a sense Nehru was all of this. And like Gandhi, he was truly pan-Indian. So I think in some ways he was the right choice. And I think in many ways he was the right choice. I have no doubt he made many mistakes, but other people made worse mistakes. And I show these South Indians that they will be part of India. Giving women the vote in the first ever election, which is not something that someone like Patel would have wanted to do. He made mistakes, was not emphasizing education was one important mistake he made. Another mistake he made was, I think, carrying on too long. Like a cricketer who does not want to retire. In 1958, he went to Kashmir, took 4 weeks off, and was going to retire, and he should have retired there. Something else should have happened. But on the whole, I think Nehru's unified personality was very important for the early years of independence. And the extraordinary collaboration you mentioned between Nehru and Patel, why is it missing now? I think this is one of the tragedies of India. Thank you for asking this question, because allow me to say something about Kashmir, which is linked to what you say. What is it? Parliament today is crazy. It's just screaming and shouting, and no bills aren't discussed, policies aren't debated. Some very important policies, including stuff that is crucial for further economic growth, like the GST is not discussed because of this. But above all, Kashmir, the kind of spitefulness and narrow-mindedness of the two major parties vis-a-vis each other is one reason we have such a massive delay. In 2003, I think it was. In 2003, Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to Srinagar. He was the first Indian Prime Minister to go there, I think, for 16 or 18 years. Because that gives us 2 months in between. There was relative peace, he went to give a talk. And the local government, the state government, was a PDP-Congress alliance. Sonia Gandhi instructed the Congress ministers of the state government to boycott his election. Now, Vajpayee was not going as a Swayam Sevak, he was going as the Prime Minister of India. It was such a petty, thoughtless act. At least then the congressman should be there saying, the guy presenting a united front to the insurgents. Fast forward 5 years, then the Amarnath Yatra. Manmohan Singh is trying some kind of deal with Pakistan to work out soft borders and making line of control, the permanent solution. And the BJP instigates a protest against about that land transfer business. And while the talks are going on, the BJP organizes a chakka jam in Jammu and stops the movement of food and medicines to the Kashmir Valley, saying, let you guys die, we don't care. Now, this is the kind of tragic behavior which is vicious, undirected, personal animosity and hostility. We see it in our own state of Karnataka too, but magnified at a national level. That's why we need to learn from the people like Nehru and Patel, and also from the time that Nehru, Parliament is absolutely crucial, and we have destroyed the importance of Parliament. And Somnath Chatterjee, who understood it because he'd been an MP for 40 years, was traumatized by his experience as Speaker, during these kinds of crazies. And I think we have to go back to a time where you discuss and debate, you decide on a policy, you support it. And we are really paying for it. what you've done to Parliament today, and the media loves it. The media stokes it. I mean, the latest issue of, the latest issue before last, of Economic and Political Weekly, has and I will tell all of you, has a wonderful essay by India's finest sociologist Andre Bete. It's called The Institutions of Democracy. And it's partly about it. It's partly of the decline of Parliament. And he talks about the disorder and disruption in Parliament. And the only people who benefit from it are the media. Because they take these guys to their TV studio, where they reproduce the disorder and disruption. So, that TRPs may go up, but proper policies and laws are never discussed. So I think we really, as a society, have to learn, as a polity, have to learn the value of constructive debate and dialogue, and finally reaching an agreement on issues of complex national importance, such as Kashmir, and which is something with the BJP. And it's hard to say who's more responsible, the BJP and the Congress here, the same way.
I think I underestimated your enthusiasm.
My question is related to as opposed, and Nehru was a much larger person than say other leaders like Rajaji or even Raman or Lohia for that matter, and they had different viewpoints and all this. Was Nehru's larger than life persona? Did it marginalize all these other ideas which seemed very practical in hindsight to be the right approaches at during that time?
Absolutely, I think you're right. I think because he had this extraordinary charisma, that he was, he has such a wide cross-cutting appeal, and he was of course also greatly admired on the world stage. That it allowed his ideas to sometimes have a salience far beyond what many of his ideas were good, but many were not. For example, his underestimation of the caste issue, which is what Ramachandra Guha raised. So, the fact that through the 50s and the 60s, the professional classes were totally dominated by Brahmins and Panjabis, right? And Lohia could see this. Or economic reform. I think we needed state protection, a kind of autonomous model of economic development, minimizing foreign trade for the first 10 or 15 years. We forget that we were colonized by multinational corporations in East India. And even industrialists wanted protection. But Nehru carried those out perhaps too long. And when in the late 50s, the early 60s started talking about opening up the economy. So that's certainly true. It's certainly true that historical processes are complex. And because he was such a larger than life personality, he also had to keep India together. If Rajaji and Lohia had been there, all these divisions, the wounds of partition, one of Nehru's greatest achievements, and I think this is something absolutely crucial to understanding what he's saying to do, is that his first letter written to chief ministers after independence said, whatever Pakistan is doing to its minorities, we must treat everyone in India as equal citizens. We are not a Hindu Pakistan. That's extraordinary. And when this demand came from the Telugu speakers for a linguistic state, he understood it. So I think giving women equal rights, not just in elections, but the Hindu code, the reforms in the 1950s, which the RSS bitterly opposed, when the RSS did not want women to have rights, and many of the RSS members still don't want women to have equal rights. There were 150 demonstrations organized by the RSS outside Parliament when Nehru was piloting the Hindu code bill reforms, which gave Hindu women, for the first time, the right to property, the right to choose their marriage partner, the right to divorce a brutal husband, the right to inherit a share of the family. The thing that Nehru did would not have stuck at that yellow. I think it's all problem. And he was able, through the majestic force of his personality, through his persuasion, his charm, and his charisma, to get these absolutely necessary reforms through. But what happened over a period of time was that there was no opposition within the Congress. Right. And I will draw a contemporary analogy, which is not entirely facetious. Manmohan Singh has too much opposition within the Congress party because he's too weak. Nehru was so towering within his party that he had no opposition. And there's a wonderful book written by on Nehru, written by an Australian diplomat called Walter Crocker, which is recently repeated with an introduction by me. It's in the 1960s. When Crocker says it was a tragedy when Nehru and Rajaji kind of fell apart, drifted apart. Because if Rajaji had been in the Congress party, he may have acted as a sobering critical influence on him. And but that could not happen, So I think this is part. I mean, the magic of his personality also brought about the necessary reforms. But he did other reforms, for which we may have paid for it.
Thank you. Continuing on, Prashant from PGP1 on Gandhi.
Yeah, well.
So I have a very simple question. Does Gandhian principles apply to today's world? And can it lead India forward? When we have Kashmir issues, when we have nationalism, when we have terrorism, so can Gandhian principles be applied to today and can it lead India?
What are Gandhian principles according to you?
Sir, truthfulness, non-violence.
Yeah, I mean, there are many Gandhian principles. The first question today was about Gandhi. Alright. And I said that the much more important than non-violence was pluralism. That's a Gandhian principle which Nehru understood, Rajaji understood, Patel understood, but many of our current day politicians and young people don't understand. Okay, so that aspect of Gandhi is absolutely central and vital to India today. Pluralism. Respect for linguistic diversity, religious diversity. Another Gandhian principle. Emancipation of Dalits. Equality for women. Gandhi brought more women into public life than any politician in the 19th or 20th century. More than Churchill, more than Roosevelt, more than Mao, more than Lincoln, more than any of these. These are all Gandhian principles. So a great deal of Gandhi is relevant today. Some of Gandhi is not. His romanticization of village economy is not relevant. Alright. But the core of Gandhi's teaching, which is that respect for religious, linguistic diversity, an ending of the oppression of traditionally disadvantaged groups like women and low castes, truthfulness, of course. So I think there are aspects as we grow as a nation, we may discard other aspects of Gandhi's legacy, things that. But I think a great deal of the reason that we have in this room people from most states of the Union, is partly because because Gandhi was able to fashion this out of this diversity into a unified nation. We need more transparency in our public life. Gandhi was totally transparent. Every letter he got, he replied to. Every criticism of his articles, he reproduced in his own paper. Now, so I think the aspects that are not relevant. Non-violence is also absolutely relevant within a country. Right? It's not between countries. If we are invaded by a neighbor, we have to attack back. Of course, Gandhi would, even later on in his life, he went back on pacifism. He said, we need an army. When the tribal invaders came into Kashmir in September 48, he said the army must push them back. So we must have an army to protect them, not to expand. One of the great achievements of independent India is that it's the only large country in the world that has never attacked another. Again, we should be proud of that. We should be prepared. But no man is within. Whether it be the violent measures of the religious fundamentalists, Hindu and Islamic, or by the Maoists, that totally antithetical, not only in our tradition, but anywhere. There's a study, again it's on the web, if you look by a think tank called Freedom House. It shows that of something like, this is ballpark figures, something like 80 successful transitions to democracy in the post-World War II world. 65 were accomplished using non-violent methods. Non-violence is much more sustainable as a method of bringing about social and political change within a country. So clearly the country is relevant. I think some things are not. I think his romanticization of the village economy is not. Ambedkar was right to criticize him on that. We have to, which is why I asked you what Gandhi is. Some have outlived their usefulness, but a great deal of what Gandhi stood for, I think needs to be remembered and recalled and reaffirmed in India today.
Thank you. Next question, the one thing that stands out about Nehru is his visionary perspective. His idealism has shaped India's history. Considering this glittering past, does the comment from Nehru's party today about compromises due to coalition dharma betray everything our founding fathers stood for? Is this the sign of times to come? Does steadfast idealism have no place in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's a large question. Let me restrict it to Nehru. I quoted Professor Andre Bede, and I'm going to quote him again. He's one of the most sagacious Indians from whom I've learned a great deal, not only through his writings, but through my conversations with him. And he once made a remark to me in private conversation, which I then have passed off in print, of course, acknowledging him. He said, it's said in the Bible that the sins of the father are visited on 7 successive generations. And Professor Bede told me, he said, Nehru's reputation is exactly the reverse. The sins of 7 successive generations are retrospectively visited on him. So the distance between Rahul Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru is rather large. Nehru himself never wanted a dynasty. Gandhi came into power because Kamaraj and syndicate thought they would manipulate her. Then she brought her children into politics. So Indira Gandhi created the dynasty. But the another question about decline of idealism. If you think about democracy, a democracy is a three-legged stool. A democracy is a three-legged stool, and the three legs of the stool are the state, private sector, and civil society. State, private sector, civil society. In the 1950s, we had a visionary and idealistic state. Civil society was totally non-existent. There was no activism of any kind. And you had a business class that was timid and insecure. Today you have an active, possibly hyperactive civil society. But it's better hyperactive than not active. The business class is kind of 50-50. My home state of Karnataka has gone from being known as the state of N.R. Narayana to being the state of Janardhan Reddy in 1 decade. Those are two kinds of entrepreneurs, N.R. Narayana Murthy and Janardhan Reddy. So it's kind of, and the state has very performed the worst of these three groups, legs of this stool. And this is a worry. I mean, I say in the Decade of India after Gandhi that a democracy can be run in mid-career by mediocrities, but it must be founded by visionaries. And I explained this. I said the distance between Mahatma Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi is no larger than the difference between Thomas Jefferson and George W. Bush. But that was my position 6-7 years ago. And I'm not so hopeful now because we are run by less than mediocrities. And the very few politicians in this country I admire. There's only one. Anyone can guess? Not Kalam. Absolutely not. Can you guess? No, not that. I mean, I respect him, but I don't admire him. I will show you I despise. Okay. Too striking. Jairam Ramesh is not bad, but he never go. He's a minor point. That's good. It is about the Nitish Kumar. Yeah. Nitish Kumar is the only Indian politician. Because here is a man who is not from the dynasty like Rahul Gandhi. He is not criminal like Narendra Modi. He is not a megalomaniac like Mayawati. He's focused on the right thing: education, health, infrastructure. He has weaknesses. He doesn't like Nehru. He doesn't have good opposition within his party. But he's capable. He's honest. He's focused on the right things. And if India had 5th, 28 Nitish Kumar is too much to hope for. But if in the next decade we can get 10 Nitish Kumars, I think we'll be a much better.
Thank you. Cybersecurity right from independence, yet even today it remains a part of one's identity. Why do you think it is? Whether it must be done away with, now can it be gotten rid of?
Actually, at a different level. What caste meant traditionally, 100 years ago and even 70, 80 years ago, what caste meant. The rules of caste regulated marriage completely. They regulated whom you could eat food with completely. They regulated who could be your friends and who could not be your friends completely. They regulated where you live, the locality in which you live completely. All this is gone, or largely gone. I'd say in the cities there's not for intermarriage. There is no segregation of locality by caste, or much less. In terms of inter-dining, in the IIM, we had every caste. 50 years ago, this would not be possible. So actually, the importance of caste as in regulating social behavior is declining in every sphere except politics. And in politics, and to some extent in institutions. And it's a complex issue. Now, affirmative action, I asked the young man who escorted me in, who is part of a new IIM program, and I said, is there any affirmative action in your program? And he said, no. I said, for me there should be. The IIM is probably found, I don't know what, and I think some amount of affirmative action is necessary, because historically caste has been the major axis and vehicle of discrimination. When the controversy took place over OBC reservation IIM some years ago, the fact was that it was necessary because OBCs are nowhere. Dalits at least had reservation. Tribals unfortunately don't always make the numbers. They should have more emphasis. So but reservation can only be one step. I think the social equality has to be addressed through education, to access to healthcare and so on. But actually caste issue caste is actually declining. Inequality may be increasing, but caste is declining as a vector in social life. If you look at the larger picture, not just reservation, not just political parties, but at the larger picture.
Thank you. I have another question. You guys didn't write your name, so I'm going to read your question. I'm sorry. Why isn't history taught to us in schools post 1947? Our history ended and political science began. Why is this, and when will it change? This drives many students away from history as a career. So it's a good question.
Let's study history, man. My degrees are in economics and sociology, and I did science in high school. So I'm a self-trained historian. Of course, sociology, I did economic history in my master's, sociology history, of course. But if I had studied history in school, I may never have become a historian. That's true. However, things are changing. And things are changing partly because of some fine work by some academics, some of my colleagues. There was an outstanding director of the National Council of Education Research and Training, the NCRT, Krishna Kumar, who was director between 2004 and 2009. And he commissioned a series of fantastic textbooks on political science and history. The political science textbooks were overseen by Yogendra Yadav and Suhas Pansikar. And the history textbooks were overseen by a very fine professor of history in the JNU called Nilali Bhattacharya. And for the first time, we have history textbooks that are readable and accessible and beautifully illustrated visually. And the political science textbook is about post-47 and deals with contentious issues. So it's as critical of what happened in Gujarat in 2002 as what happened in Delhi in 1984. So it's a brave textbook. I mean, the BJP would like to forget what happened in 2002, and the Congress would like to forget what happened in 1984. So, however, the problem now is that these NCRT textbooks are only taught in central schools. They are not mandatory on state government, because state government's education is a state subject. But the first time now, because of the work of my colleagues, my close friends and colleagues like Yogendra Yadav and Nilali Bhattacharya, you have halfway decent textbooks. And a way should be found of other schools, including private schools, really working on those. I mean, taking those textbooks forward.
Thank you. I have a question here from Naveen about India as a democracy.
Yeah.
Would you like me to read it out, or?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think of India as a democracy? Are we maturing in terms of democracy, or too much of dynasty, corruption, undermining the institution of parliament? Where do you think the slippery slope started?
Where do you think?
The slippery slope started.
As I said, these three schools. Everything I've said today. I think in a sense, there's an underlying common theme. That social change, social evolution is a complex, multi-dimensional process. The improvements and the regression, in different spheres of life. So, democracy is a three-legged stool. The state, there's a decline in the capability and efficiency and the ideals of the political class, and the efficiency and capability of the administrative sector too. But there is energy in civil society. So I think it's a big picture. I mean, I said in my book I called it the artistic democracy. I think democracy is not a utopia. See, you can only hope for a 65-35 democracy. All societies are flawed, and especially society is large and populous. I think we must issue institutional reform to correct those deficiencies in parliament, in the bureaucratic class, in the political parties, so they are open and transparent. One of your professors, Ridokal Shastri, is associated with a group called Association for the Protection of Democratic Reforms, and which has very outlined a series of very important steps for electoral reform. Rajaji was mentioned. Rajaji once said that the one sector in which the state should be more active is election, state funding, in one way. So I think there are lots of reforms that are necessary to make our democracy more efficient. But there is no alternative to democracy. in India. I mean, Winston Churchill, whom I don't normally quote approvingly, but I will here, once said that parliamentary democracy is the worst system known to humankind, except for all the others. And I mean, the fact is, I had a brave Indonesian friend who was thrown out, who lived in exile for many years, an English scholar, and he used to tell me, he said, you are so critical of your politicians. This is the 1990s. He used to tell me, you are so critical of your politicians, but you realize you have gendered elections. In our country, we have election of the gender. So I think democracy is India's destiny. It's the only way this complex, diverse, cacophonous, troublesome, conflict-ridden society can be kept together. One of the reasons India has not had a military coup is that the generals know that they will have to have 28 simultaneous coups. It will be beyond. So I think we have to find ways of patiently improving it, step by step, incremental reform, away from the gaze of the media. I think the media is great at highlighting a problem. It's disastrous at taking it forward. And they can be terrible. Okay. Now, when we started, I think the first fast for Anna Hazare was very important because it mobilized public opinion around the horrible corruption that was going on. But what happened later? Immediately after that happened, I rang about, I won't name the person, whom you see on television all the time. He's part of the team Anna. And I told him, just stay away from the television studios. Once the team or the discussion between the 5 members of Anna Hazare and 5 members of the government, I told him, don't go into a television studio because the media is great, is very bad for bringing about any positive reform. But our friend is there all the time. And don't say publicly, is Sipar honest? I'm not sure. Then they'll go to Sipar. That guy is a charlatan, will say Sipar. So Sipar should also keep away from television studios. So I think reforming democracy is patient hard work. It's kind of work done by, under the radar. It can't be done, through a public court and through these tamashas and 24/7. So I think this is a lesson. To me, the lesson of the Anna Hazare issue is how you have to be. Jana Ramesh was mentioned. Jana Ramesh is the first state minister, but he talked too much to the media. If he, and even I think he's done his lesson now. I think he's not talking. So it makes everyone has behaved right. The separatists too. They done things like so-called more moderate separatists, the Mirwais. It took him 15 years to visit a Pandit camp in Jammu. He should have gone immediately. 1990 the Pandits were expelled. 92, 93 should have gone. Now those families are coming back. But so it's a very complex issue and requires again hearing the rules, reconciliation, debate, dialogue. But fully realistic option is soft borders, line of control international boundary, and respecting the autonomy. So the kind of crazy solutions on the Hindu right, settle the place, do to Kashmir what the Israelis did to the Palestinians. That's a recipe for disaster. That's probably more violence, more terrorism, and so on. So, but there has to be reciprocity on the other side too. The Pakistanis also have to realize that they have created untold damage and suffering to the people of Kashmir too. No one's hands are clean. Not the Indian government, not the Pakistani government, not the separatists.
Thank you, sir. I have a question here from Major.
I have 3.
It's about the makers of India.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go ahead and read it? Okay. In your prologue to Makers of India, you say that you chose to leave out Patel because there was a paucity of original ideas in their published work.
Yeah.
You later also say that the book is about arguments and argues of the past 2 centuries.
Yeah.
Would your book then not have been called Thinkers of Modern India or Scholars of Modern India? After all, Sardar Patel, as a strong leader, did play a major role in the making of India.
I pay full tribute to Patel in India after that. And the criteria for makers of modern India, as I say in my prologue, is that to be thinkers and activists. Not only thinkers who have done, the pure scholars who not have done. I'm a smart, I know the English language, so I'll cover all my bases. It's called Makers of Modern India, not the Makers of Modern India. It means there will be many makers of modern India, one not enough. I would say that what I hope for my book is to spark many more subjects. People have ignored, people have given less emphasis to. There's so much rich material in our Indian language is not been translated. One person who is a great truly great visionary, whom is not, whenever I went, by the way, whenever I went to a book release, every state they complained about someone from that state. Gujarati said, why no Patel, and the Tamil said, why no Kamaraj, and the Bengalis, of course, had many complaints. But what just complaint the Bengalis had, which I'm saying this, is that they said, why no Bose, like you're saying, why no. I think Bose, I'm happy I didn't include Bose. The Bose was just, where there is a very mechanical thinker. But one Bengali I should have included, but I couldn't because there is no good translation in English yet, was the great social reformer Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Women's rights and education, it's fantastic. So, I hope my book, every work of scholarship is part of a conversation. It's not the beginning, it's not the end. It comes at a certain point and hopefully it will continue on. People will revise, amend, refute what I say. That's how scholarship progresses.
Thank you. We have about 10 more minutes left. Can we open it for questions? Okay. Here's a question about an article called Bangalore, the Divided City. You mentioned the renaming of Bangalore as Bengaluru may thus be viewed as part of the unfinished business of linguistic nationalism. You also go on to mention, I myself feel that the demand for renaming Bangalore is legitimate and should be honored. Calling the city Bengaluru is consistent with history and custom and it hurts no one. Doesn't the re-questioning of the name of any Indian city for any reason reduce the value of the established name recognition that the city enjoys internationally, which ordinarily the city would spend millions trying to acquire?
Well, it's a complex issue and there are fights in my own house. When the renaming took place and I said what I said in an article, I said it to an interviewer, I'd come home and while I was telling the interviewer this, my wife was shouting at me from behind. He's wrong, he's wrong, he's wrong. And she has every right to say it, not only because she's an equal citizen of India, but because she grew up in Bangalore like I did. She's that much claim to the city. But I feel Bengaluru is the official name, we can still call it Bangalore. To me, Mumbai and Bombay are both acceptable. Delhi and Delhi are both acceptable. But Mumbai is what it was called by Kolkata and Calcutta. I mean, it should be, but as the official name, it should be Bengaluru. I mean, Paris and Paris. I mean, the French don't call it Paris. Roma and Rome. The Italians don't call the city Roma. So, Rome, they call it Roma. So, you know this. I mean, since it's the capital of the linguistic state of Karnataka, it's a small gesture. And the non-Kannadigas should, not be so petty about it. And where it's a brand, I mean, Bengaluru, Mumbai hasn't hurt, what hurts the operation of the Sensex is not Mumbai and Bombay, the other things. But the main name is irrelevant. And it's a gesture to the people who are in a sense linguistically, and it's a small gesture. And if you are so pig-headed that you won't even give this, you will have much worse to come. I mean, the Kannadigas are done with it. I mean, that's why we don't have a Bal Thackeray here. If you want a Bal Thackeray, call it Bangalore.
There was actually a part of this question which I missed. I apologize. I think this should be read out too. Not many foreigners would want their jobs Bengaluru now, troubled as they are with their jobs being Bangalore.
Yeah, I mean, it's, of course, it's a great tribute in my city that successive presidential candidates, including Barack Obama, invoke his name in its capital. But I think Bombay, Mumbai, Bombay is Mumbai for the Maharashtrian, Bombay for the international elite, and Bombay for the UP Vaya also is there. So all Delhi, Kolkata, Calcutta, Bengaluru is about, it is the capital of Karnataka, whose official language is Kannada. And as the example of why don't you start a movement to make Roma, Rome? Please. And then you'll be consistent.
Here's a question that references an article by Mr. Shashi Tharoor in Times of India called What's in a Name? Affirmative action in our country has met with mixed success. While it has been able to pull a significant number of the disadvantaged sections from ill fate and oppression, it has also prevented several meritorious candidates from the upper caste to lose out. When, if ever, do you see the United States of India abolishing, quote-unquote, United States of India abolishing caste-based reservations, given that this is indeed what the framers of the Constitution ultimately envisioned for this country, an India of equal opportunity?
There are many anomalies in the system, and that's to do with the weakness of the political class. One anomaly is familiarity. Another is generations. There should be a clear provision that only one member of a family can get, that if I get the benefit of affirmative action, my child can't. You know, Narayanan, who was one of the best presidents India ever had, his daughter got in the ISS on the quota as he had. This is totally wrong. It's completely wrong. And this is the kind of, then other aspects should be, maybe limit, the creamy layer, or no one who's in the first class officer of the IAS, of MLA, and you should have to find ways of ordering it better. One other thing that is totally wrong, this is to do with my wrong, though allowed in law, it's to do with my alma mater, St. Stephen's College in Delhi. St. Stephen's College in Delhi was founded in 1881 by a group of Christian priests. Over a period of time, many other people joined. It never had an official Christian quota. From the Indian independence, the bulk of public funding, bulk of the college funding was given by the state. And for the last 30 years at least, I think probably the last 40 years, 100% of St. Stephen's College's funds have come from the state. Yet, according to law, 50% of the seats can be reserved to Christians. When I was a student in the 1970s, and when Shashi Tharoor was also a student, and both of us were shaped by that college, and actually I was one of his volunteers when he became president of the St. Stephen's College Union. I can't pay for him. And we were molded. The thing about St. Stephen's College was, it was totally secular. No one cared what your language was, now it is a Christian, non-Christian business. And it's because they allow in the law. According to the law, if you are a minority founded institution, even if you are 100% funded by the state, you have 50% reservation. So, St. Stephen's College has been, and the character has been destroyed and the quality has been destroyed. The national law schools have reproduced St. Stephen's College as the place where the cutting edge thinking and research in the humanities has been done, and it's because of the parochialism of the Christians who run St. Stephen's College. And so that's allowed in the law. So the aspect, and the Christians, unlike Muslims, unlike Dalits, are not disadvantaged. And the guys who have benefited most from reservation in St. Stephen's College, and I would say, and me, I'm blunt, is a very prosperous Christian community. The Syrian Christians are problem. So, and likewise with the K.R. Narayanan case, or with IAS officers. So I think the problem is not reservation per se, it's the way it's managed, there are the distortions in the law, and for some time I think we need it. I think in public institutions, I think there is no case for quotas in the private sector. There is a case for voluntary affirmative actions in the private sector to make it more inclusive. For example, there is a wonderful initiative that was started by Infosys to get people of disadvantaged homes into the triple ITs. That's fantastic, and many more companies should do it. But that should be done voluntarily. There is no room for quotas in the private sector. But in the state sector, given centuries and centuries of discrimination, which continues, if you look at any major profession, you will see the low caste and the Adivasis are still not there in proportion to the numbers. So I have a small disagreement with Shashi Tharoor. I think some amount of reservation is necessary. It's a nuance. You can't have yes or no. Yes, no reservation in the private sector, affirmative action voluntarily by companies to promote more inclusive policies on gender, caste, religion, and so on and so forth. In the state sector, including education, some amount of reservation, but done to plug all these leakages and loopholes.
Thank you, sir. As I mentioned, we have enough questions to probably last several more interactions like this. And that's exactly the reason why EPGP has the seminar series, right? So with respecting Dr. Guha's time, we'll have to end this interaction. I'm going to ask esteemed professors if they have any questions, quick questions. With that, may I ask Dr. Rajiv Gowda to come up on stage and give a token of gift for Dr. Guha?
Short question.
Okay.
Debate workshop, we have to address some of the systemic flaws. For example, party funding, which will create a political situation. We want to create a everyone's signature, but the reality is consideration opportunity only for those institutions like money. Generate.
Absolutely.
So you don't see this discussed much in the
So I think it should be. And I think the work of APDR and the ADR, and others take it forward. And Veerappa Moily, when he was the law minister, has started a series of discussions on this, and I hope the present government will continue. Because Virat Mohli understood, that this is one of the problems. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's a very, I don't think it's the only source of corruption, but it is a major source. I think some of this shall be, but large parties are driven. I think some of this happens through oversight. We talked about the idealism of the 40s and 50s and 60s. I think what happened later on is there were politicians in the 70s and 80s who realized enormous money to be made first on defense contracts and then on land fees. And that went into, of course, party funding, but also then into the private coffers. But you're absolutely right that transparent funding, limits, and state funding of elections. I think these are things that we need, and you're right that this whole discussion, and that's because once you reduce it to television, then it is whether Kapil Sibal has called Anna Hazare name change to Hansal Yaranga name. So these are all complex issues which you have to debate. There should be something like this. The television should say let's have 2 hours on election funding and have this experts. Not have Ruchan Shastri and some other people there, not have guys. Television only wants to be calling each other names. That's it. And that's not a healthy way to. But you're absolutely right. That's a crucial aspect of. But I don't think it's the only aspect. I think there are many other layers to corruption in India, and that's one.